My name is Mike Geyser. I work for a company called BBD Software. You may have heard of us. I'm a web developer, or a specialist web developer there, and I'm not going to tell you my whole life story, as interesting as it would be, because I'd rather get onto the code. You can come catch up with me afterwards if you really are interested. Suffice it to say that I work with JavaScript basically every single day. I'm here to talk to you about Angular 2, specifically riding the Angular 2 wave. So, to get started on that, I think we'd talk a little bit very briefly about what Angular 2 is anyway. So essentially what we're looking at with Angular 2 is a high-performance single-page application framework designed to be component-based with modern web standards in mind. And it's also designed to be mobile-first and agnostic to a certain extent. It's completely independent of running in the browser, which is very, very cool. There's some nice things and a whole bunch of tooling around it. So what is Angular 2 not? Angular 2 is not an incremental version of Angular 1. Basically, from a superficial perspective, they look nothing alike. They're built nothing alike. The metaphors are nothing alike. All it shares is essentially branding. Basically, it's a whole new framework, not even built by the same team that built the original one. So if that's news to you, being a developer that works in Angular every single day, I'm really, really sorry. It feels like I've told you that the tooth fairy doesn't exist, but hey. So moving on from there, if you have heard of this, you would have heard a lot of the hype around Angular 2. Considering that it basically only shares marketing with Angular 1, they push that marketing angle very, very heavily. So this statement to me is a double-edged sword. The hype is real being the idiom that, well, there is a lot of hype around this thing. Yes, absolutely. And removing the signal from the noise is really, really, really problematic. But at the same point in time, the hype is there for a reason. There's some real benefits to the framework, and there's some very, very cool stuff coming. So to move on to what we're actually going to cover. Typescript, it's going to cover System.js very, very briefly. We're going to look at property and event binding in Angular 2, and we're going to look at component hierarchies, how you build them, how you compose them. Unfortunately, what this talk will not cover is component routing, still very, very raw and difficult to show in such a short time span. Observables, well, we're going to use React.js, we'll discuss the React.js link. I'm not going to be showing it explicitly, but there's some very cool stuff in there. We're not going to be talking about Angular Universal, which is server-side rendering for a single-page application framework, which is awesome, but again, time, and we've got to start somewhere. And I'm not going to be talking about the Angular command line interface, which is basically cloned from the Ember command line interface, because that's also very, very raw. We're going to start at grassroots. So to move straight on to what we're actually starting at, or what we're going to be using in this application, well, the demo, is we're going to be using Node and NPM, basically because you can't build stuff on the web unless you start with Node and NPM. We're going to be using Typescript very, very heavily, because that's the happy path with Angular 2, and we'll discuss that a little bit later as we go on. And we're going to be showing off, specifically with Typescript, Visual Studio Code and browser sync, which is very, very cool, if a bit gimmicky at times. And lastly, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth with it, but I am going to show you some visualization and debugging using Augury, which is the Chrome plugin for Angular 2. Cool. Right. So to get onto the demo, I evaluate a lot of single-page application frameworks, and invariably I always start with the same place. I start with something called To Do MVC. If you haven't checked it out, I really recommend you do it. I'm not going to be able to get internet access now to show you. And basically, it's the same app built over and over and over again in many, many different single-page application and JavaScript frameworks. Very good way of measuring parity. Right. So in the interests of cheating, I'm going to start building a To Do MVC application. So I have got the initial node module dependencies down because I wasn't going to rely on conference Wi-Fi to download all this stuff. But the rest of it is basically just raw initial config. So we're going to start off with the package.json for NPM, just so that I can talk to you about what those dependencies are. We've got some NPM scripts that I don't really want to worry about too much. The only one we're really going to be using is start. But this is straight off of the Angular quick start application, essentially. Then we're going to get onto our dependencies. Now, this is the actual interesting part for our application. So this stuff all of these dependencies are basically the bare minimum for Angular. Now you can start seeing that it's been broken up a lot. It's very different from the Angular 1 experience, which is CDN1 JavaScript file. Cool, done, get started. There are millions and millions and millions of sub-dependencies, and you can basically build up the framework to be exactly the parts that you want or need, which is a good thing. It just means that initial start experience is not as awesome as it would have been previously. But maybe that start experience was a little bit of an illusion. Then these last two dependencies we've got are the common framework bits and pieces for to-do MVC, which is basically just the CSS scaffolding, because you don't want to see me type out CSS for 30 minutes. That's painful, trust me. And the development dependencies, that's just a cool thing that I came across when building this demo, which is to concurrently run grunt tasks, a simple HTTP server, and then the TypeScript typing stuff. Okay, so then to move straight on, we've got TypeScript. So let's talk about that. The reason why we're showing this in TypeScript is because that's definitely the happy part at the moment for building Angular 2 applications. And the Angular 2 team has worked closely with Microsoft to come up with really, really nice framework enhancements specifically to their annotations and decorators. So if you want to get started, definitely the place to start to take a look at. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using this relatively default TypeScript configuration. We're going to be targeting ECMA script 5, which is JavaScript current, the sort of standard that we expect. We're going to be using CommonJS as our compiled exports module. Okay, there's a whole bunch of additional stuff here. We're going to be generating source maps, which I'll show you a little bit later as well. And we're going to put all of our compiled resources in the output directory. It's just a personal tasting. I don't like mixing it in with the TypeScript code. Then I've got an index.html to start with because you need something to load the application in. And this is relatively simple. It's just linking to the to-do MVC style sheets. It's loading some polyfills that I think I might be missing some references on, but hey, whatever. And importantly, we're using System.js to load up the entire application. We'll talk a little bit about System.js now because the default Angular 2 Quick Start recommends using it. It does add a little bit of complexity into being a dynamic module loader, but if you want all of the cool package and module exports and package definitions that you get with TypeScript, you really want to be building on something that uses that. Okay. So this file I'd like to not reference too much because it is the standard quick start System.js configuration, and it's got a whole bunch of stuff just so that Angular can find itself and load itself up depending on what you pick and choose. But the important parts is here, we've got a mapping that says, well, my application actually sits in the distribution directory. So I'm going to compile there and you're just going to load up everything from there. And you'll see that I'm actually looking for JavaScript files. So this is important because when we look at our module import later on, you'll see we leave off the file extension. Okay. So I think that's everything covered. We can then run, hopefully this is the only time you'll see this window, because I'm going to write npm start, and then I'm going to run npm start and run all the codes. Okay, anyway, so we'll see that something loads up, and it's actually not very, very much that does load up. Okay, so we're going to leave that alone, and we see our dis main doesn't exist. So now we're going to start with our actual Angular 2 application, rather than struggling with npm and Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to create a directory called app, where I'm going to put everything in. Now, the entirety of Angular is composed of components, component hierarchy, and we're going to start with our app.component. Now, at its core, the entire application is just going to be a component that's a plain old JavaScript class, right? But now, this isn't enough to actually bootstrap the application, so we're going to need to inject some Angular magic in the form of annotations or decorators. So depending on which background you come from C# background, you'll recognize them as attributes. These are actually decorators in the ECMA script 2017, or was it 2016? I forget. They may be coming in normal JavaScript, but for the moment, this is one of the bits that we really care about TypeScript for. So what we're going to do is we're going to import that component from Angular core. If somebody can explain to me why they chose @Angular rather than just Angular, I would love to know, but I can't tell. So in here, inside that annotation, decorator, sorry, you can see we pass through a configuration hash. Now, the important things that we're going to pass through here is firstly, where we're going to find our application, which is under a selector, and then what we're going to show. So for the moment, I'm just going to pass it through a hard-coded template that says h1 hello JSinSA. Who invited you? And we're going to put everything under to-do app. Okay, so this to-do app, this selector, references our index.html here, and you'll see there is this cryptic to-do app element that we're going to be bootstrapping everything onto. Now, speaking of bootstrapping, we're not going to do any of our loading here. We are required to add an entirely additional file, which is going to be our main.ts. And in our main.ts, we are going to import bootstraps from a library I always forget, so I'm going to copy and paste it and cheat entirely. Angular Platform Browser Dynamic, right? So we're going to import it from that. Okay. Then we're also going to say, well, we want our Angular application, or the core component, the start of our Angular application. So we're going to go app component from, and it's app.component.ts. And we're going to bootstrap. We're going to call bootstrap. We're going to pass through our app component, and we're going to say there are no dependencies for the moment. Let me just make that tidy. Bootstrap. Hopefully the rest goes a bit better. So this is now going to start. And we've got a hello JSinSA that I cheated on entirely. Okay. But hopefully you'll see that I spelled bootstrap correctly here. Did I? I did. What the hell? Oh, was there a TS? Oh, I must have added. That was it. TS. All right, cool. So we're going to start with that. The first thing I'd like to show off is, if it works, the browser sync features. So we can just hit save, and this should automatically update, which is quite cool, right? Yay, something works. It's the first thing that's worked. Yeah. Ironic applause. Okay, cool. So now we're actually going to start building our application, because we don't really want to be using hard-coded HTML inside our JavaScript. That's not a thing that we're going to do. So we're going to put all of our HTML in app.template.html, but this is going to be the entire path. So it's going to be app.template.html, and we're going to create another directory, or another file that we're going to load up. It's going to be app.template.html. Cool. Now I'm going to cheat some more and put in the standard bootstrap, to do MVC sort of scaffolding, and that's basically where our entire application is going to sit within. Okay? But now we want to load up a list of to-dos. So luckily, I've given myself a little to-do list, because I'm going to forget everything without it. So I'm going to copy the to-do list into app.components, and in here, in our constructor, thank you, Peanut Gallery. What would I do without you guys? Okay, and you'll see that we've got a list of to-dos that we're just going to specify as a to-do array. We don't have a to-do class, so I'm just going to hack it in here for the moment. So we're going to go export class to-do. We're going to have it have a title, which is going to be a string. And you can start seeing some of the TypeScript benefits here. And we're going to have a completed, which is going to be Boolean. Okay, and we're going to have our constructor, because I like to make my life difficult. And we're going to pass in title string completed Boolean. Okay, and then in here we're going to go this.title, and it's in minuscule font, unfortunately. being the pop-ups, but you can see Visual Studio Code gives us a whole bunch of IntelliSense. This dot completed equals completed. Blah. Let's format it. Great. So now we, in principle, have a list of hard-coded to-dos. In here, we're going to start by binding the hard-coded list in here. Now, to be able to iterate over that, we're going to use a directive, an Angular directive called ng_for. Okay. And in that, we have to use ES6 syntax, or hybrid ES6 syntax, which is let of. So we're going to go let to-do of to-dos, and that should bind onto the scope, that to-dos variable that we've got here, and display each of them. And unless I've made a big mistake, I should just be able to go to-do.title there. Have I made a mistake? Oopsie. I have made a mistake. Template needs to change to template URL. Yay. Awesome. Now we've got a list of to-dos. No. Thank you for the ironic applause. I was hoping to only get one of those, but hey, I suppose it's my own fault. Cool. So now we need to start with our list of to-dos. So we can actually mark that list of to-dos. The first item is complete. And, oh wait, it is complete. So the second item needs to be done, which is to add the conditional styling. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about property binding, which is to say that I want to add a CSS element on a certain case. And I'm going to add it on the view. And in here, I'm going to then add that I want class.completed to equal to-do.completed. Right? Which is to say that whenever on each of those to-do items, I want to set that to true there. Loading that up. Oh, come now. Was that the right one? That was the right one. Did I do it in the right place? Sorry? I can't hear that. Sorry? No, it's in the right place, unfortunately. It's the to-do MVC template that I copied. I know, I'm being trolled. Damn it. I get easily trolled. Please don't. Anyway, so conditional styling. Conditional styling is now done. Yay, I'd like to mark it off, but I can't. So now I want to start binding something to say I want to push a button. So I'm going to go back to my cheat list just to get the starting of it. So in here, I'm going to add a checkbox. Let's just fix that formatting. All right, so on this checkbox, what I want to do is I want to say, well, when it gets, firstly, show it as checked when it's checked. So we're going to say set the check property to to-do.completed, which is quite cool. If you're familiar with Angular, you'll already start seeing very, very big differences to the ng- standards of the previous version. Then we're going to use the round brackets, which is cool. What we're going to do is we're going to now push an event back onto the scope. So to do that, we're going to say on click, we want to toggle completed on this to-do item and pass through the reference to that to-do item, which is great. Now what we can do on our app component, we don't have to smash anything onto scope. We can just create a method now. Because we've bound this thing as a component, you can just say toggle, please spell it correctly, to-do, pass, this is a to-do type, and here I want to set to-do dot completed equals not to-do dot completed. Yay. Okay, and then hopefully that'll work. So firstly, we can see the conditional highlighting there. Great, it's checked. And I can toggle something completed. Wow, a seamless step in the demo. That non-ironic applause, please. You can convince me and make me less nervous if you don't accompany that with laughter. Just saying. I'm just saying. All right, cool. So conditional styling is done. Marker to-do is completed is done. Yay, add a to-do. Now we're going to get onto the create part of it. So I should be able to create a to-do from the top here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create that as a separate component just to show you how this stuff nests. Okay? So I'm going to, in the side here, create a new file which is going to be create.to component.ts, and I'm going to accompany it immediately with a create.template.ts. Oh, sorry, HTML. Almost the stuff up there again. And here we're just going to export the class again, which is going to be the create component. Damn it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And then in here, we're going to create or import our component from @Angular core. Okay. Then we can specify the component. And we can say that the selector is going to be create to do, and the template URL is going to be app create. Why did I make these names so long? Okay, right. So that's going to be our subcomponent. So we're going to hinge off of create to do. We're going to create a component off of it, off of this template URL. I'm going to cheat once again and just grab the input and put the input inside the create template. I'm going to, inside the app template, create a piece of markup here that's called create to do. It's not allowed to be a self-closing tag for some other reason. I think that's so that they can actually do the transclude support. Right? And now, when I reload, it's not going to show up. Okay? This is very different from Angular 1 behavior because I've referenced everything, but it's not going to respect nested directives or nested components until I tell it to. So what I actually need to do is I need to go into my app component here, and I have to actually import create component from create.components. I think create.components, sorry. Don't put the TS, that's the path to the dark side. And then in here, I'm going to add a directives array. Now, I specifically have to declare which components this is going to be composed of. So inside here, I'm going to say, cool, well, create component is going to be passed in. Format, great. And then in here, when I reload it, browser sync has already pushed through the changes, and it's given me this component thing that I can type into, which is great. Okay, so it's now registered it, everything's wired up, and I can start in my create component saying, well, cool, I'm going to have a title, which is going to be a string, right? And then I'm going to have a, I don't have to do anything like constructor, but I'm going to have a create method that I'm going to pass through, and there I'm going to create my to-do. So now I need a reference to the list that's inside my app component, this to-do list here, which is immediately obviously a problem. There are ways I can hack around it, I can pass it around. We'll talk about some of that just now, if I have time. I'm going to rush. But for the moment, we're going to look at a different option, which is injecting something. So what I'm rather going to do is I'm going to create a store, then I'm going to keep all this stuff in. So I'm going to create a to-do.store.ts file really quickly. And inside here, I'm going to have an export class to-do store. And in here, I'm going to have a list of to-dos, which is going to be an array of to-do. And I'm going to, in my constructor, have my hard-coded list. To-dos equals, wait, why don't I just copy that? I don't have to type it all out. I'm sure nobody will judge me for my copy-paste coding. Okay, great. So, yeah. You suck. In the nicest way possible. All right. Then from here, we're going to just grab our to-do class that exists over there so that we can reference it here. And this is going to be all that we put in here. We're going to have no Angular code in here. Then in our create component, in our app component first, we then need to make sure that we don't break anything. So I'm going to get rid of that. We're going to import both of those classes, so both to-do and to-do store. from to do, come on, fingers, dot store, okay, which I hope will work. And then in here, we're just going to say this dot to do's equals to do store. Oopsie. Maybe it would have helped if I had done the useful part, which is put the to do store in our constructor. Okay. And we're going to go to do store dot to do's. And we've got auto completion on all of that, which is great. To do dot store, that will hopefully update.
Is that a comma in the to do store?
Bah, humbug. Right. No, this is the right failure. I actually got the right error that I was expecting. So if we reload this, you'll see we get an awful Angular error. And the reason why we get the awful Angular error is because we're using the dependency injection for the first time. Okay? So what we're going to do in our main, we're going to have to specify our dependency in here. Okay? So the last thing I'm going to do is just time's up. Oh, damn. Okay. So apologies for that. The last thing we would need to do is just put our to-do store in there. And that's basically get that started up. So we don't have time for questions, unfortunately, because despite my insistence, everyone else being early doesn't mean that I get their spare time. If you want to, please catch me afterwards. I'm really sorry we didn't get through everything. Okay, we can rotate the speaker so long and we can ask some questions. Yay. Woo. Yes.
So, I take you to work with Angular 1
Yes.
and Angular 2.
Yes.
Okay, performance difference. But what was the reason?
Very, very important point, right? So what Angular 2 has is it's got a unidirectional data flow as opposed to relying on updating the scope in every single scope update, triggering, re-rendering the whole page, essentially. They broke that up and they're claiming up to a 5 times performance improvement over Angular 1. Now, a big part of that is why they necessitated the need of splitting up the property binding and the event binding. Okay, so you have to declare them separately, although there are ways around that. Yes?
Yes, coming from Angular 1, what do you see the learning curve to get into Angular 2?
So that's actually a good question. So the Angular team tried to address the issues of it being very, very tricky to get into, as they saw. I didn't have that impression, but there was a lot of complaints about that, and the path into Angular 2 is a lot easier, they say. So it's difficult for me to compare that, but I know that they put a lot of focus on that first experience being really, really, really simple.
So some of like the concepts that are in Angular 1, you also find them in Angular 2 still?
Absolutely. So under the hood, it doesn't look the same. There is still scope. Scope behaves differently. There are still directives. Directives are just behavioral directives, not template directives, if that makes sense. So there is a path across. It's just not seamless, unfortunately.
Just migrating from Angular 1 to 2, using that NG upgrade, how feasible is that in a scenario for which you put like a full Angular 1 application?
Absolutely. They're putting a lot of focus on that. So there is a potential upgrade path. As a part of the core framework, they're letting you bootstrap an Angular 1 application inside an Angular 2 application and share the dependencies. So it's possible, but I suppose from a practical perspective, would you really want 2 very, very different code styles littering your code base? So while it is a way to facilitate that migration path, I don't necessarily think it's the be-all and end-all. Yes?
So for applications that were built in Angular 1, is there a way to migrate to Angular 2, or does it mean complete rewrite?
So the long answer was the previous one. The short answer is yes, it's a complete rewrite.
Simon is pushing me on.
Okay, well, swatch over. I'm going to take some questions if that's okay. No, it's cool. Push me. Anything else? Yes.
When I worked at Angular 1, I found that there's a lot of documentation on how to create a controller, how to create a directive and factoring service, but what I was looking for and I couldn't find, I don't know if I just didn't find it, but was a guide to say this is how you should structure your application, this is the recommended pattern, this is what a direction will do, because I thought for any given problem you want to solve, there's a million different ways to solve it. And Angular can really say, this is the recommended way of solving a particular problem. Is Angular 2 a lot better at that?
Absolutely. So that's an important question because that's basically the reason, part of the reason why they needed to change. Angular 1 grew organically. They didn't really know what the best practices are, and they've redesigned that now. They've made that initial experience of how to build your application a lot easier. Find me afterwards and we can talk about the Angular command line, and they've got a really, really nice way of how you build stuff. And also, if you think about it, you don't really have to worry about the difference between services and directives anymore, because everything just gets injected as a plain JavaScript class. I really have to go now.